I loved playing with magnets as a kid. I loved the way they stuck together, and it felt like magic, how I could move things without touching them. But as I played with magnets, I learned one key thing about magnets that every child learns, and that is not all magnets are the same. Some magnets are so strong you can hardly pull them apart. They will break your electronics if you get them too close, while other magnets are so weak that they fall off of the refrigerator and your mom throws them away before you have a chance to capture them. And so, what is true with real-life magnets is also true with reader magnets. Sometimes our reader magnets just aren't very magnetic. And sometimes our reader magnets are so magnetic that we can rapidly grow an email list of tens of thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands of readers. A reader magnet, if you don't know, is an immediate reward for joining your email list. It's supposed to magnetically draw readers onto your email list so that when you have a book to announce, you have a lot of folks ready and eager to find out about that book. For novelists, magnets are typically a novella or some kind of short story. And for nonfiction, it can be a quiz or a guide. There's a lot of flexibility in what a magnet can be. In fact, therein lies the secret to making your magnets more magnetic, is having the right kind of magnet. So, how do you make your reader magnets more magnetic to readers? Find out in this episode of Novel Marketing, the longest-running book marketing podcast in the world. I'm Thomas Umstattd Jr., and our guest today is a Marine Corps veteran and the author of the Shades of Black series. He's also the CEO of The Strategic Author, a company dedicated to help authors target their ideal market. Jonathan Shuerger, welcome to the Novel Marketing Podcast.
Hi, Thomas. Thanks for having me.
So, walk us through your approach to making reader magnets more magnetic.
My background is in Marine Corps intelligence, and it was our job to track targets, specifically ISIS, in the war that I was in, and find targets that were trying to hide in a digital environment. But you have lots of different ways to try to track the same targets, and if you want to find this particular kind of target, you have to go where they are, and you have to know what they're doing, and you have to listen to them and hear what they're saying. In the same way, you have to do that with your reader. If I'm going to create a lead magnet, then that's going to reach my target reader, and I can have several, but you only target one person at a time. I'm only going to focus on that one individual, and I'm going to go where they are.
Not everyone is a potential reader for your book. And this is one of the kind of unfortunate things that every author learns when they first get started. Because you're writing your book and like, everyone in the world will like this book. And you're like, everyone? You're like, well, all the English speakers. You're like, really? All of the English speakers? Well, and so you keep asking them that question until finally they realize, oh, actually, it's only a very narrow subset of people. And typically it's people who are like the author. And at least for most authors, when they first get started, they're writing for folks who are like themselves, right? So if they're a 50-year-old woman, they're writing for other 50-year-old women. If they're a 25-year-old man, they're writing for other 25-year-old men. Not always, but often when people get started, that's how they're getting started. And they just assume that the reader is exactly like them in every way. So how do you develop that target? How do you, as we call it in this podcast, find your Timothy, the kind of reader who, once they hear about your book, that's all they need. They already want your book. They're like, finally, a book for me, and they're an easy sell because the book is for them.
Right. So what we use is several different kinds of intelligence, and we synthesize those multiple kinds of intelligence. So examples would be signals intelligence, the digital behavior of the target. You have human intelligence, which is what people are around the target are saying about the target.
And this is really untapped for authors. Human intelligence requires you to actually, in real life,
you gotta talk to them. Yeah.
If you're online all the time, you don't have access to human intelligence. And sometimes spending some time with your target reader in real life can be very illuminating.
Yeah, so you want to ask questions, basically, which will eventually lead to the lead magnet. It's your entrance to your sales funnel that's going to get readers into your economy and have them circulating around like fish in a pool. You want to keep them there. You want to give them something, a reason to stay in your pool, and then, of course, you'll continue adding products into your pool that will keep the fish there and keep them happy. I guess signals intelligence would be like you are looking at influencers, what people are talking about books, Twitter, Facebook. What are your readers, or what you think are your readers, What are they saying about books that are in your genre so that you know how to target your book or your lead magnet, and you know how to reach those particular kinds of people?
I would say discussion groups on Goodreads.
Discussion
All
groups,
of this
yes.
is lurking, right? We're not posting to
Exactly.
Twitter. We're not posting to Facebook. We're just listening to kind of get a buzz. What are the tropes that are resonating with readers? What are the books that they're the most excited about that has them talking? We use the word listening, but you're not actually listening. You're just reading.
Right.
Posting. But you're learning. This is not promotion. This is consumption of their content.
Right. Then you move to human intelligence, which is where you actually have to go out and start interviewing. Now, you have to learn how to interpret the intelligence that they're giving you, which is why we all hate human. Like, even in the intelligence community, human is the least verifiable. It's the least reliable piece of intelligence that we have, because we're interviewing someone and we're getting what they think they know, which doesn't mean it came from the source. It's one step removed from the source. So be careful with human intelligence. You do have to interpret it, and you need to gather a lot of it. You can't just interview one or two people and think, okay, I found my target reader now.
How do you do that, right? People are like, I'd love to interview a bunch of my readers, but how do I find them? Where do I find readers who are willing to talk about books?
Oh, well, go to the obvious places first. I mean, if you're going to find a reader, go to a Barnes & Noble.
Just walk up to a stranger and be like, hey, what do you think of that book?
Oh, that's not as hard as you think it is, because people actually love to talk about their books. Book shoppers love to talk about what they like to read. It's like the only thing they like to talk about. So if you go up to somebody in a Barnes & Noble and you see they're carrying books in their arm like this, you look at, just kind of tilt your head, look at the cover, what they're, oh, I haven't seen that one. Is that any good? Oh, man, I love this author. Or, hey, I'm just trying it out. Okay, well, what made you decide to pick that one? Was it the cover? Did someone tell you about it? And just start asking the same questions. And that's something that's important in gathering polling data, is that you ask the same questions. You got to have a control set so that you can identify variations in the data, so that if you get an outlier, which you will get, you know how to discard it and not actually keep it as part of your process for determining a target.
Some people are weird, and you don't want those weird people to be your Timothy, unless they're weird in a way where there's a lot of other people who are weird the same way. Because otherwise, your target audience is this one weird person, and that's not enough to build a career on.
Correct. You want normal weird. Okay, so weird is okay, because you actually do want to target your niche. Okay, the whole point is focusing in your data. So you do want to get to a level of weird. Well, weird is the wrong term. You want to slice. You want it narrowed in and focused so you can see it clearly. You know, this is the kind of person who likes to buy books that just have symbols on the cover. Okay? This is a Sarah J. Maas type of reader. Okay? They read books because influencers are recommending them, or because they're on that table in Barnes & Noble. And there's a very shallow level of suggestion that causes them to perform a buying decision. That's that kind of target. And so reaching that kind of target is just as simple, and I say simple, the actual mechanics of doing this may be difficult, is getting your book on that table.
And you may find that the kind of reader magnet that works on influencers is different than the kind of reader magnet that works on typical readers. And one of the things I find for a lot of authors is they feel like they can only have a reader magnet. Right? It's like, this is my homepage reader magnet. It's the only reader magnet I can ever have. And if I make another reader magnet, I have to replace this reader magnet with a different reader magnet. And if you wanted, every page on your website could have a different reader magnet. Mm-hmm. I have like a dozen different guides and tip sheets attached to various episodes. And, you know, I have the one reader magnet on the homepage for authormedia.com, but I have, you know, many others on many other pages for attracting other kinds of listeners. And you can do the same thing as an author. And once you realize, oh, this can be focused, then suddenly you're like, what would a book talker, what would a book influencer be interested in uniquely? And then you're starting to think about tailoring that offering specifically for that audience. And that most other authors are not thinking this way. They're not thinking about, how can I target a bookstagrammer with a reader magnet specifically for a bookstagrammer?
Right. We can dev out a target real quick. Let's say you're going after a particular bookstagrammer. You will obviously want to go onto their Instagram page, and you'll perform what we would call signals intelligence. You will listen to their videos, watch their videos, listen to what they're saying on their videos, see how they present the books when they do so visually, because Bookstagram is a visually focused venue.
And determine if they're even a good fit for you or not. Because 9 times out of 10, they're just not your kind of person. They don't review your kind of book.
You have to look at more than the number of subscribers, please. You know, like he has 50 million. He's perfect. You know,
I can make it work. I can fix him.
You have a sweet Christian Amish romance you're trying to sell to a dude who argues about Game of Thrones all the time. It's not going to happen, okay? You need to listen to what it is that they're saying, because you actually have multi-level targeting that goes into when you're targeting a hub, okay? Because hubs have multiple sets of criteria for why they choose to do what they do. So your Bookstagram influencer is concerned with their audience. They want to provide something to their audience that is interesting. So you have to position your lead magnet in a way that's also interesting to their audience, but it also has to be interesting to the influencer themselves, because this is a person we're talking about, not an AI. It's not as easy as, hey, I hit all the check boxes at the robot once, so now you should send my lead magnet out to all your people. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to interest them and hook them, and also be interesting at a step removed to their audience.
And sometimes the way that you interest them is just by paying them money. Let's be real clear here.
Money answereth all things.
Yeah, a lot of book talkers, a lot of book reviewers, a lot of these influencers, the way they make money is by doing paid promotions. And if you don't realize that as an author and you're sending them your book hoping that they'll promote it for free, if this is what they're doing for a living, they can't do that for every author. They may do that occasionally, a book that they just like and they promote it on their own. But it's probably a book they discovered on their own. So if somebody reaches out to them, if they're an influencer. And by influencer, we're using Book Talker and Bookstagrammer as examples of many kinds of influencers, right? This could be a speaker at a homeschool convention. This could be a podcaster. It could be a radio show host. The question is, who is influential to my target reader? And there's a whole constellation of those kinds of people, and that's who we're targeting. And different influencers will be influenced by different things. But as you reach out to them, you need to realize which ones are looking to get compensated and which ones are not, right? If somebody's a radio show host, they're probably not looking for money to come on their radio show. They're needing to entertain their listeners, and you need to convince them that you'll be entertaining or informative to their listeners. So the more social media they are, the more likely they're going to expect money. The more traditional media they are, the more likely they are to not expect money.
Yeah, you do need to consider that as well, because if you try to offer money to the wrong influencer, they'll be offended and actually push you away.
Right.
This would be your kind of, I know Thomas talks about this a lot, your mom at Thanksgiving. You don't offer your mom money at Thanksgiving for making dinner. That would be a mistake. Okay, yeah. That's how you don't get dinner made for you again.
So how do you figure that out? You found an influencer and you're trying to find out, is this the kind of influencer who will be offended if I offer them money, or offended if I don't offer them money?
Sure. So this is where you get into your ability to read people. It's not an exact art. It's not an exact science.
Well, sometimes it is. If they have a media kit or an advertising page on their website. So there are
clues. But even those people, you can't pay them enough to take your stuff. If, say, they're of a particular political ideology, if they're on the left, they're not going to take your Trump book. If it's a sweet Christian YA influencer, not for any amount of money are they going to peddle your erotica. You have to know your target. There are no's with everyone, even if it looks like there aren't any.
And nowadays, I think it's easier to determine the ones that do paid sponsorship, because there's now laws that require them to disclose that this is a paid sponsorship. Not everybody follows those laws, and they're not well enforced. But the bigger they are, the more of a target they are for the government, and the more likely they are to disclose, hey, this is an affiliate link. This is a paid promotion. And often they'll be like, hey, I was sent this copy of this book for free from such and such author. So you want to, as you're listening, right, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, one of the things you're listening for is, are they disclosing paid sponsorships? And the ones that don't do that, sometimes they make a big deal about it. because they're very proud about the fact that they are not for sale. Like Consumer Reports, for instance, right? Very proud about the fact that there's no advertising on Consumer Reports. If you want a consumer report, you as the customer have to pay for it. And they're very loud about this. And the same is the case with influencers. If they're not for sale, they make sure to let you know.
Yes. And you can get that vibe. And the way you do that is you watch a bunch of them. Listen to how they interact with the network. Listen to how the hubs interact with the network, and you'll get an idea, because people copy each other. No one knows what they're doing. They're going to imitate one another. And so you'll get an idea for how things are normally done. You want to target meaningfully the greatest momentum in the network so that you can achieve the maximum impact from your limited ordinance, which would be like your budget, the number of lead magnets you can produce as an author, the amount of time you have to invest into this kind of a thing. You need to make sure you're targeted as much as possible so you do the least work possible.
Because there is a balance here. The time you're spending developing a lead magnet is time you're not spending writing your next book. And you get paid for writing books. You don't get paid for writing lead magnets. Lead magnets are how you start the relationship with a reader, but they're not how you get paid, and they are a little unsatisfying. If you're just giving your list reader magnet after reader magnet, eventually they're like, hey, we want a real book from you. We want a completed novel. And so you want to be strategic in that the reader magnets you develop are good and appealing, but the other part of that strategy is once you have those good, appealing reader magnets, now you can go back to writing your next book.
And you need to properly chain your reader magnets so that they do what they're intended to do. So first of all, have an intent for your reader magnet. What kind of reader magnet is this? Is this a reader magnet that is supposed to grab some random reader and bring them into your economy? Like they came to your website and you have a little pop-up that says, hey, here's a free book, here's a free few chapters, whatever it is. Is this a new reader that you're trying to obtain? You need to target your reader magnet appropriately. Or is it someone who read your book on Amazon through advertising or recommendation through an influencer or something like that? You need to have a different kind of reader magnet to then bring that person onto your newsletter list so they know when your next book comes out. And this would be like in the fantasy genre, you make a map. Someone who's already read the story, enjoys the story, hey, if I sign up for the newsletter, I'll get a map that I can print out, or you can do genealogies.
The first time I ever heard about a reader magnet was before the term had been developed. This was in my very early days when I was just teaching websites and I hadn't really gotten into marketing. But I'm going to writers' conferences speaking on websites and how to make your author website better. And I remember running into an author who had added like 2,000 or 3,000 subscribers to her list over a month or two. And so I was like, how did you do it? And she was writing romance, and she had written a Christmas story about two of her characters. I think it was the love interests of the stories, but it was like the next little thing that happens, like their first Christmas together. And she had released that. And I think her books were in a series. This took place in between book 1 and book 2. In book 2, when she released her Christmas story, hadn't come out yet. So she wrote a little Hallmark movie. It wasn't long, right? It was like 5,000 words, 10,000 words. And it was with the characters everyone already loved. And her readership just went crazy for this. When they heard, oh, John and Sally's first Christmas, they were like, shut up and take my money. Oh, you don't need my money? You just need my email address? Right? They're racing to download that. And she was able to dramatically grow her list of the very perfect people, right? 'Cause who most cares about John and Sally's first Christmas? People who already know who John and Sally are, right? These are her existing readers, and now she's got them on her list, which gives her this amazing baseline for her next book. They're primed, they're ready, they're excited, they're ready to buy today, not tomorrow, once her next book comes out.
And this is great for what you're saying about those authors who already have books out and they already have characters out. Now, hopefully you wrote it well. Okay, I've run into plenty of authors who wrote their first book and marketed it well, but the book itself was not great and no one bought book 2 because you got to work on your system a little bit more. You got to work on the product.
If you're new to writing, the very first book in your series is the primary marketing tool that you'll use for the next decade. And it's how you'll be judged for the next decade of writing. And often people's first books or even second or third books aren't quite strong enough to carry it. And sometimes before you write The Lord of the Rings, you need to write The Hobbit, right? And then go back to work on your craft and your tone, right? The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, is very different than The Hobbit. Obviously, it's the same characters, it's the same universe, but the tone is different, and it's a more mature story. And Tolkien matured as an author in between. Now, for him, I think it was like 20 years between The Hobbit and The Fellowship of the Ring. But there's something to be said about not committing the next 10 years of your writing to your very first freshman work. Sometimes it's okay to write a standalone novel, or you write a standalone novel and then you make it a series if it sells really well.
There you go.
You can only sell.
Leave that door open.
You can only sell book 2 to people who read and loved book 1. And so if you don't have readers begging you to write book 2, maybe you don't write book 2. And so structure your first ending in such a way where it's a satisfying ending in a standalone book, and you don't have to write a sequel.
You want to have your first book have those hooks that your audience wants. And I actually did this for several people. I sat down and talked to them. I was like, tell me your story, and I'm going to stop you when it gets boring. Because everyone hates a saggy middle in a book, and that's what causes people to put books down in a book-saturated environment, which is an interesting trend that I've seen among readers. It's DNFing, did not finish. Because there are so many books to read. It used to be a thing. I will finish every book that I pick up, and that's going away.
Thank God, because I feel like it pulls people out of the book buying ecosystem. Because they read one book, they didn't finish it, and they feel like that now disqualifies them from ever buying any other books for the rest of their life. Right? They have to go back and finish that one boring book they purchased, and it's like life is too long. There's too many amazing books out there. If you're not enjoying the book, you don't need to finish it. But if they didn't finish book 1, they are not going to read book 2.
Correct.
And that's really important to know, especially in fantasy, epic fantasy. A lot of people want to write that 12-book series, and that can work, but it only works if you have a book 1 that's good enough to carry 12 years worth of writing books, right? It needs to not just resonate with readers now, but it needs to continue resonating with readers 6 years from now when you're working on book 6. Because what are you going to be using as a primary marketing tool 6 years from now? Book 1, right? You're going to be putting it on sale. You're going to be putting it on BookBub. You're going to be buying ads, not to promote book 6. You're going to be buying even more ads for book 1. And so that book 1 has got to just grab readers and pull them through the end and leave them thirsty for more.
Book 1 becomes your lead magnet. It becomes the bait, or it becomes the hook to get people into your ecosystem at that point. And that's when it has established a reputation of pleasing. Okay, so there are two main chemicals that go on in someone's brain when they're reading a book. You got dopamine, you got adrenaline. Okay, adrenaline is the exciting stuff, and dopamine is the satisfying stuff. And you have to have interchanges of the two of them in order to create a satisfying experience in a book. And what I do when I write my books is I try to get the reader to make a physical sound when they're reading. If I can get a from someone who is staring at thinly shaved wood and hallucinating, if I can get them to make a physical sound,
or laughter, or crying,
something. I had a lady put my book down, push it away, and smack it because I freaked her out so much. She was like, I'm waiting for book 2. Why? It made her feel something. I had an impact on her life, where you're trying to disrupt someone's normal flow of their day, which is why they go to books, okay? You have a lot of people who are, and consider your target, this is what I'm talking about. You have a lot of people who work in day jobs they hate. They're going to work, they got to do customer service, and they hate people. They're book readers, they hate people. They're dealing with people at their worst in service industries. They are working 8, 9, 10 hours a day. If they're working a double, it's worse than that. And you and your book, for the 20 minutes they can stay awake, is what they're going to for some relief. And you have to provide them that relief that they are looking for. And if you don't do that, they don't come back. You don't have what they're looking for.
So let's get real specific back to the reader magnet, and let's talk about some other ways that we can make it more magnetic, more appealing.
So when you're trying to attract someone, you need to give them what they want on an impulse level. You're trying to hit them at a very low level of thought. If you're up to high level thought, it's really difficult to grab someone there because now you're arguing. So there's this level of confidence that an author has to have in the product that they're producing, and that they're writing it for a reason. They're writing it to a target, which you would say writing to your Timothy, to change that target's life, to make them smile, to give them a solution to a problem, to make themselves better or pull themselves up out of something that they need to do.
One technique that can help with having the reader magnet that resonates is having a book club or a reading group that reads your genre. Mm-hmm. So a support group if you're nonfiction. So if your book's about overcoming depression, then you have a support group of people overcoming depression that are reading books about that. But if you're fiction, right, it's like, hey, this is the romance readers group. This is the military sci-fi readers group, right? And you create the group so that you can set the schedule so that every once in a while you're like, hey, I wrote a military science fiction short story. Let's read it and discuss it. But it's also about, hey, we're going to read the #1 military sci-fi book that came out this month, and you're listening as you're facilitating the discussion to see what people liked and what they didn't like, and interacting with fans of your genre in a genre-based activity. People would love to join these kinds of groups. There's a huge demand for somebody else to start the book club. And every author wants to join a book club that somebody else starts. So now all I want to say is be the change you want to see in the world. Stop using your introversion as an excuse. Introverts are wonderful book club discussion organizers. They're wonderful writers group organizers. Being extroverted is not like some sort of like easy path. It's hard for them too. And so just do the work. You'll find that it's incredibly rewarding. And introverts need friends as well. One of the things that's happening is we're spending more time online, is that we're getting more comfortable around fellow humans in person. So you're doing good in even more ways. You're not just helping your marketing. You're not just connecting people to each other, but you're also helping them get out from that digital world and start interacting in real life again. So I have a book club that I'm a part of, and it's like one of my primary social outlets, because this is a very isolated time in my life right now with so many small children. It's hard to get out and to go and do things. But every other week I meet with a group of guys and we discuss books, right? We go fiction one and then nonfiction, back and forth.
That brings up an important point when we're talking about book groups is allow free conversation, even if it turns into fights. Okay? Because you are data mining. And one thing you don't want to do when you're trying to collect communications is jam communications, okay? You always get that lieutenant who wants to push the jam all enemy communications button. And we're like, sir, what's our job? To collect enemy communication. What can't we do when you jam all enemy communication? We can't listen to what they're saying. Yes, sir, thank you. Get out of my office. No, when you're in a book group or when you're data mining, you never want to try to control the conversation because you're listening to what they're saying. And if they're fighting, that's even better because they're passionate about it. And they're actually saying what they think. And you need to pull those data points out because you're going to need that data. But if you're going to control what people are saying, if you're going to say, oh, Susan, we don't speak that way here. Okay? No one's going to talk. Because now you're policing what it is they're saying. So don't jam your own communications.
The more involved you are in the conversation, the less helpful the conversation is from a learning perspective. Because the more you talk, the less you listen. Right? As my dad was always telling me, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Right? So you should be listening more than you speak. But also, the more you talk in the conversation, the more your preferences and worldview color the conversation, which can be good in a normal conversation, right? Because that's the whole point, right? We want to share our perspectives with other people. But when it comes to learning things from a marketing perspective, learning about your readers, you're not wanting that. You're wanting to just learn. You're wanting to just listen. And the better you are at listening, the better you are at writing. And I think this is a secret for really successful authors, because I've interacted with authors who've sold millions of copies, and I've noticed a few things about the really successful authors, the ones who are making more than just a living. They're making a fortune. And one of the things is that for the novelists, they tend to have really good empathy. They're really good at noticing people and understanding people from their own perspective. And that empathy allows them to craft really believable and compelling characters that are different and distinct from each other. And it's those compelling and relatable and compelling characters that draw readers to their writing, because they're like, oh, I really like that character. And different readers are drawn to different characters, and the authors who are able to sell millions of copies are able to have different kinds of characters in their books that appeal to different kinds of readers, right? Some people are reading because they really like Harry Potter, and some people really like Hermione. But those different characters that are well-rounded appeal to different readers. And so the empathy is really key. And a critical element of empathy is listening. I think empathy is a superpower for authors, and the authors who don't have empathy or who haven't cultivated the skill of being empathetic, because it's not something you're born with. Trust me, I've interacted with many small children over the last 5 years. None of them are born with any empathy. They do not care that they're waking up mommy because they are hungry. They do not care about mommy's feelings. They just care that they're hungry, right? We all have to learn empathy. Some of us learn it better than others, and it's not too late. If you didn't learn empathy, you can learn it now. And the first place to start is listening, and listening for understanding rather than listening waiting for a time to talk.
You can cultivate that empathy, and the first way to do it is, okay, maybe this idiot is saying something of value. And when you're like, okay, I'm actually starting to see where he's coming from. Now he's not an idiot anymore. And you're listening more and more, and you're starting to understand more and more about what he's saying, where he's coming from. And when you know what he's saying and where he's coming from, you know where he's going to go. And when you know where he's going to go, you can start targeting. And this would be placing a lead magnet into your target's path, placing a book into their path, whatever it is that hooks them from the path and causes them to create a decision. You want to create an impact on their life, but you want to create a decision at this low thought level, at this impulse buying stage. But you have to do that when you know them.
Imagine a writer who has got a reader magnet and it's not working. They have the magnet, but their list is still really small. Maybe it's stuck in the single digits or kind of the low double digits, and they're trying to figure out why their reader magnet is not magnetizing readers. What encouragement and advice would you have for that author?
Well, I would take a look at the magnet itself. I'd start asking questions. What do you want your magnet to do? And then what does your magnet do? And so we would take a look at the magnet and be like, well, you have a 2-chapter insert here, but it's just your prologue in your first chapter, and your inciting incident happens in chapter 3. So what you gave these people was a setup and nothing else. There's no chain. There's no reason for them to stay engaged, because they're like, oh, thank you for the word salad, and they move on with their lives because it hasn't made an impact on them yet. So I'm going to look at what your lead magnet wants to do and look at what it does, and then we're going to start adjusting the impact zone. Okay, why is this not making an impact? Maybe your audience is hardened, which is another whole talk, is when a network has been targeted repeatedly by the same tactic, it hardens to the tactic and it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, let's talk about that real briefly, because I think that for some authors, they're getting their advice from another author and they're copying what that other author is doing. And the fact that that other author is using that specific tactic on that specific audience makes that tactic on that audience less effective for every other author that copies their technique, until ultimately people are so fatigued with the same kind of short story for the same kind of novel, and they're all advertising to the same tiny group of people on Facebook, that tactic stops working for that group of people. And it's not that short stories don't work or reader magnets don't work as an overall tactic. It's that it specifically doesn't work the way that you're implementing it, because you're all targeting the same 50,000 people that it doesn't work on over and over again. And you're like, expand your horizons. There are readers outside of this 50,000 identifiable readers on Facebook for this genre.
And you run into an insecurity problem too, because authors are not the most confident people in the world. They're taking art that they grew in the darkest recesses of their hearts and they're now putting it out there for everyone to look at. It's hard to do. You're also insecure, and so when you hit a network that's been targeted by the same exact tactic 90,000 times because you're doing, newsletter swaps, and guess what? The guy you're trying to swap with has done newsletter swaps for 3 years now. His audience is hardened to a newsletter swap, but you don't see that. You think there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with my reader magnet. There's something wrong with me as an author. I shouldn't write anymore. And that's how you achieve burnout very quickly. This is something I had to teach my Marines about. It's like, no, you're not a bad analyst, okay? You need to adjust your angle. Find a different approach, find a different way to find that guy, because that guy can be found. There's always a way to hit somebody.
Part of the reason why the novel marketing method has worked for so long part of the reason why this is the longest running book marketing podcast, is that it doesn't rely very much on looking at what other authors are doing. In fact, I feel like I spend a lot of time trying to redirect where my listeners are looking for their advice and direction and answer to their questions away from other authors. So if an author is curious about whether a book cover is a good book cover or not, the temptation is to post it to social media and get feedback from other authors. And the novel marketing method is go to your reader, right? It's like if you're looking for techniques, like you're like, what social network should I be on? You don't look at what the other authors on your genre are doing. You look at your Timothy and you see what social networks he hangs out on, because often your biggest, most strategic advantages are being the first author to realize, oh, this group is really active on Rumble. And there's not any authors talking to my reader on Rumble. I could be the only one there.
Exactly.
or whatever, right? And so by going to your reader, knowing who your reader is, by going to your reader, it's reproducible over time. And it's less susceptible to fatigue and hardening.
Correct.
Because you're looking at what would work for my reader right now rather than trying to copy what worked for another author last year.
And let me bring up something real quick, as this ties in very well. It's something called circular reporting in the intelligence community, is when you listen to someone who isn't the target and they write a report and you write a report on their report. And then everyone else in DoD says, oh no, this guy put out a report on this and it came from this source. We all need to write a report on this. So now something that's not reportable, it's not actual truthful intelligence. It's an assumption, or it's an exaggeration, or it's even worse, it's like a thought someone had, a hypothesis. And now it's reported on everywhere in DoD, so it has credibility, will cause a strike to totally go wrong. Yeah, and you get into legal issues and diplomatic issues and stuff like that. And I see it happening in the author community all the time because authors listen to authors. And you can't do that because you're not writing a book for that author. Have you noticed authors don't buy each other's books? Have you noticed that? Every time you post a link in some Facebook author group and you're like, oh, here's my book. No one buys it. Weird. We don't buy each other's books. Okay? Because we're trying to hit readers. But if you're constantly reaching out to a community of authors who are insecure and competing with you, you're not going to get that kind of unpolluted data back. What you're going to get is a feedback loop. Because what you get from a bunch of insecure authors is an overabundance of positivity. You're doing great. Your writing is great. You are valued. You are validated. This is a safe space for you. Your cover is beautiful, even though it's illegible at a thumbnail size, which is the only place it works in advertising. You know, you can't create that feedback loop. You create that feedback loop, it is death to your career. You have to go to the source, which is the reader. You have to listen to what the readers are saying. Hey, did you like my book? Why? Like, what was it about it that grabbed you? Who's your favorite character? What do you think of? Did you grab it because of the cover? Did you grab it because someone recommended it to you? What is the reason that you picked this up? Gather that data from the source. Never, and I can't say this enough, and if you're in Intel, listen to me, do not take Intel from somebody who's not the source. Okay, you have to gather way more of that so that you can be sure that it's correct. Because if you've got an author friend or 5 and they're saying, yeah, go do, they don't care. This is your career, man. You're the one paying for those ads. Like, you're the one that's going to pay for that book cover. You've got to make sure that their intel is good. Go to your source. Do not get stuck in a feedback loop of circular reporting.
Be the mommy bird going out and eating fresh food, not the baby bird getting the regurgitated food from the mommy bird. TheStrategicAuthor.com is the website. Jonathan is hireable if you're wanting somebody to help do the marketing for you or help do the marketing with you. He is one of those folks who's still taking on new clients, and we'll have a link to TheStrategicAuthor.com in the show notes of this episode at authormedia.com. Jonathan Shuerger, thank you so much for joining us today on the Novel Marketing Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Special thanks to our new September patrons, Brian Bovey, Elias Monroy, Ken, Isabel Mathis, and Joel Crumbly. Thank you so much for your support that helps keep this podcast on the air. I could not do this without you. Every year, my family hosts the National Night Out. This is a program through local police departments where it's an opportunity to meet your neighbors. And I go with my kids and we put flyers on the doors of all of our neighbors and we invite them to come to our front yard, and I grilled cheap hot dogs and corn on the cob, and it's a lot of fun. And one of the interesting things I've noticed hosting these National Night Outs is that if you go on social media, there's a special social network for neighbors called Nextdoor. People are nasty to each other on Nextdoor. They're constantly complaining and whining and having political fights and complaining about each other's driving. And it's a really negative, hostile place, generally speaking. It's not all that. Some of it's, lost dogs and things like that. But if you get those exact same people and you have them meet in real life, they're all super nice to each other, incredibly polite. And I'm really looking forward to our National Night Out that we're hosting tonight. And I just want to, we talked a lot about social media on this episode, and I just want to remind you, you don't need to do social media. Everything we talked about, you can do in person. In fact, it might work even better if you do all of these things in person. Meeting with people in real life, speaking to groups of people in real life is always going to be more effective than the equivalent of that on social media. So you're an adult. It's a free country. You can do social media if you want to, but there's no pressure and there's no need to do social media in order to be a successful author. The Novel Marketing Podcast is a production of authormedia.com. You can find the blog version of this episode along with links to everything we talked about at authormedia.com/434. I'm Thomas Umstattd Jr. saying thank you for listening and live long and prosper.